Let me first once again say a big thank you to Pastor Mark, as we would call him in Haiti, for the invitation to come and to share with you, and to Paul for putting together music that in many ways has touched my heart over the years. Let me just say it's really a joy to get to participate in your worship service. I do find it's one of the things I miss. So thank you for letting me come and share about this life that I have the opportunity to live. Your church has already provided support in many ways, for which we are very grateful. And I am looking forward to the opportunity of the group coming and where God will take that time. Your commitment to this mission and this ministry and being a part of what God is doing. As Mark said, I am CBF field personnel in Grand Guave, Haiti. I was commissioned in 2010 and have served there ever since, so 9 years as of August 2nd. An amazing bit for me, because I don't think in my growing up that I lived any place more than 4 or 5 years. So let me share with you a bit. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. A famous quote by Soren Kierkegaard. As I look back on my life, so many pieces fall into place as if by the Master's hand. I know now that God was leading each step of the way, even in those times when I thought I was farthest from him. My life as CBF field personnel in Haiti is by the master designer. I grew up the daughter of ministers. My dad, a religious educator in the Southern Baptist tradition, and my mom, a children's minister, both ordained as Southern Baptist. The Word of God and church activities were the center of our traditions. As a child, I learned about missionaries and their adventures in GAs, and I daydreamed of being part of the adventure. That and about a million other professions. Singer, actress, doctor, lawyer, etc. But as a teenager, my life took different directions. I got involved in theater. I went off to college to study music, only to drop out in the second semester to get married and have a family, walking further and further from God with each step. I wasn't involved in church in any way for the very first time in my life, and had developed some really bad habits that were not acceptable in my parents' world. It wasn't until after both of my daughters were born that I felt the pull to come back to church. I wanted them to have the experience I had had in Sunday school and GAs. My mom happened to be at a CBF meeting and sitting next to a pastor who lived in the town that I lived in. He was instructed, and when I use that word, if you ever met my mother, you know I mean instructed, to visit me and invite me to church, which he did. And we started attending. He showed up at my gate one afternoon and said, I met your mother. She said, come to invite you to church. My girls were in school at that time when I decided to go back to school and become a nurse after working in pharmacy for 7 years. My plan was to take care of crack babies in the NICU. I'd read an article in the paper, and I felt that that was a need. But the doors didn't open, and somehow I ended up in oncology, giving chemotherapy for 20 years. Why oncology? I'm not really sure, but I knew in my gut that that was where God wanted me. Jeremiah 18:4-6 says, So I went down to the potter's house, and there he was working at his wheel, and the vessel he was making of clay was pointed in the potter's hand, and he reworked it into another vessel, as it seemed good to the potter to do. If we truly abandon to him then he can do with you as he pleases. Following in obedience is risky and requires obedience. Hebrews 11:8 tells us about Abraham. It simply says, "And he went out not knowing where he was going." My career as a certified oncology nurse took me to practices here in North Carolina, from the northeastern corner to Virginia, to western North Carolina, and to New York City. Life had taken many twists and turns. My marriage ended, job changes, one job was phased out. For the first time in my life, I'd been asked to step down from a position. Each step had its challenges, but God seemed to have a plan, and I was learning to depend on him. As I read earlier, Isaiah 55:8-9 said, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, and neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts." Moving to the Big Apple was never in my thoughts. It was a huge step in my career at a prestigious cancer center. I never had that in my career plans. I was going to build the grandma house. My kids were in high school and going off to college. I thought I'd build the last house that we'd live in, and that this would be where my grandkids would come. I was living in a beautiful place in the mountains of North Carolina. That's my plan. God had a different plan. It was God's plan, but it was precipitated by a tragedy that has framed much of my life since. My brother, who was at that time living in New York City, completed suicide. My desire at that time was to be closer to his widow and my nephew. So I packed up and began a 13-week travel nursing job that turned into almost 5 years. And then life changed again. I got an email from a ministry friend who had started taking short-term mission teams to Haiti in 2002. He kept inviting me to come and go on one of his teams. His organization went 4 times a year, and I kept saying, "Someday." You ever said someday? Yeah, someday I'll do that. Well, we all know that that's far off. But this particular email said some spaces had opened up by a group that had dropped out at the last minute, stayed with me. I couldn't seem to get away from it. I decided to commit the matter to prayer. I was finally in a financial place that I could do it. So I emailed my best friend and accountability partner and asked her to pray with me. Her response surprised me. She said, "If God has placed this on your heart, then you know you should go, so shut up and go. I'll pray, but shut up and go." So I signed up, and then I went to look and find out where Haiti was, because I knew nothing about it. In less than 6 weeks, I was sitting in the Miami Airport Hotel listening to the orientation, and the leader was telling us all of these things they call the "oh, by the way" statements. Things like, make sure your mosquito net is tucked in. Things like to climb in with you at night. Oh, by the way, the showers are cold. We're not talking lukewarm, we're talking cold. Oh, by the way, there are mosquitoes. Oh, by the way, Haiti's hot. I sat there wondering what I had gotten myself into and questioning why God had brought me here. But faith is stepping out in confidence when it makes no sense. Our project that week was working with a school and a church, all about kids. The only medical I did that week was cleaned up scraped knees and such. Not much call for a nurse, much less an oncology nurse. But I came back from that trip knowing more about me than I did about Haiti. God showed me much about the person he was creating, but I felt a desire to know more about Haiti. So I signed up with this organization for another trip. Their November trip, the week of Thanksgiving, had a waiting list, and they had space on a trip in the March of the next year of 2008. So I put my name on the waiting list and on the March list, figuring it would all come together. In October, late October, I got a call saying that the Thanksgiving week had an opening and I was next on the waiting list. Did I want to go? I had to laugh. I worked in a hospital, and many of you know hospital schedules are set for holidays plenty in advance. And so that late asking for a holiday week off was difficult. And I said, but sure, why not? I'll go in and ask. I thought I knew my manager's response. So I walked into his office very flippantly and says, hey, can I have the week of Thanksgiving off? He said, sure. I said, excuse me? Did you hear what I asked for? He said, yeah, you can have it off. Next thing I knew, I was back in Haiti again. I had already signed up at that point for a trip in March. The week of Thanksgiving was another amazing week. Once again, it wasn't a nursing week. It wasn't medical. But it was an amazing time to learn more about the people and the communities there. When I got back, as I said, I had already put my name on the March list. I had already paid a deposit. I decided I would keep that commitment. But I didn't feel like Haiti was the place I was going to end up. I knew that God was leading me to do something more missional with my nursing, but I didn't seem to love Haiti like everybody else. When we'd go to leave the country, people on the team would have tears rolling down their face, going, oh, I just love this place. I'm going to miss it. It's got a part of my heart. And I'm standing over here to the side saying, Lord, I can't wait for a hot shower. So I didn't think Haiti was the place I was supposed to be. But March came around, I paid the deposit, I kept the commitment, and I came on that trip doing something you should never do. I came on that trip saying, this is my last trip to Haiti. I was telling God what it was. On Sundays with that team, we usually walk down the beach to get acclimated. We'd walk through a couple of villages so that the team could get comfortable where we were. This particular Sunday, we came across a man on the beach who had hacked his leg with a machete. I cleaned the wound and put a bandage on it as best I could with the supplies I had with me, and we continued on the walk. Back at the compound that afternoon, we sorted through all the supplies that we had carried in for the projects that next week. And as we sorted, we came across a bottle of an antibiotic that no one knew where it came from, had no name on it, but it was an antibiotic that would be effective for the infection in that man's leg. I asked, could I take it back down? And the leader responded, yes, we'll find time. But if you know how these trips go, life gets very busy with all the projects and the activities, and the next thing we knew, it was Thursday afternoon. We were leaving on Saturday. So I asked, could we go back down? He said, grab a translator and go. We found the man sitting in the shade of his grass hut on the beach. I knelt down in the sand to change his dressing, and my memory is of baby chicks pecking around my backpack. And as I was focusing on the task that I was doing, he stopped me and lifted my face to look into his, and he simply said, merci, which is thank you in Creole. I didn't know much Creole and didn't know how to respond, so I said, you're welcome in English, and went back to my task. When I got back to the compound that afternoon, I sat in a rocking chair overlooking the water as the sun set. And as I started to think through the events of the week and the day, tears started rolling down my face, and I asked God, what happened? I'm not angry. I'm not upset. Why am I crying? And the words I heard my God say was, this is where I want you. This is home. And I responded, you open the doors and I'll walk through. It took another 2 years and many frustrations and closed doors, but God did bring me to Haiti full-time through CBF's As You Go program, as it was called. That was 2010. I made the official move to Haiti in August of 2010 after the earthquake and started working with the CBF's Earthquake Disaster Response Program in Grand Guave. A year later, I shifted to my original service proposal, which was to do mobile medical clinics in areas that have limited access to care. Now, 9 years later, God has continued to refine that direction and continued to place new challenges in our path. I came with an agenda, but God showed me that this was long-term. I came with a plan that it was going to be 2 years, that I was going to start these mobile medical clinics in communities and, in my mind, fix them, and then I was going to go on home. But God showed me very soon that to develop the relationships meant long-term, building relationships in these communities to come along beside them, to grow and to transform into what God has planned for them takes time and commitment. So I committed to Him for the long haul, whatever it might bring. I would say often, I will stay till the funds run out, because at that time I had to raise all of my own funding. I'll stay till the funds run out. Then I'm going home. There's a Haitian proverb that says, if God sends you, He pays your way. And I have learned to believe that every time I look back and see in reverse where He has brought me, because He has continued to provide for me to be there. The ministry in Haiti at this point focuses on the 3 areas that Mark talked about: medical, education, and shelter. We do mobile clinics in 4 consistent sites every month. These sites have limited access to care. 3 times a year we bring full consultation clinics, and at least once a year we have a dental program, a vision program, and a women's health program offering pap smears to women who have no other access. The in-between months, I do follow-up clinics and focus on our blood pressure and diabetes clinics, helping them with consistent, continuous care and their medication. We have been amazed at how God has often placed us in the right place at the right time for some unexpected situations. One April, we had a group of pediatric nurse practitioners, and so we were doing focused pediatric clinics in all 4 of our sites. And as we climbed to Mount Sinai, which is one of the poorest and most difficult places that we go to, requires a 4-wheel drive truck. We had trouble on that road, and we could not get past this one particular section. We got out, all of the team, all of our supplies were in the back of the truck, but we stood along the side of the road as the 2 trucks tried to get past this area with no success. I was interested when Pastor Mark and Brad came down in March that he had told Brad that we had a gravel road. And I said, if you call rocks the size of softballs gravel, it's gravel road. Anyway, we couldn't get past this spot, and as I was standing there, I looked over and I saw this building. And it was a little Haitian church, and there were these 2 men standing out front that were watching our efforts. And the idea struck me, why don't we see if we can go there? We were only about 1 kilometer away from, maybe 2 kilometers away from where we needed to be. So we discussed it with the gentleman on the front. They called the pastor. He said, oh yes, please let Miss Jenny use the church. That would be wonderful. We called the other church leader where we were going and asked him, could he ask the people to walk down to us? They agreed. It was interesting. The pastor said, you know, I did a prayer service there earlier this morning and I didn't lock up. But he had left and gone into the village about an hour away. And he said, so it's fortunate that I left it open and you can get in to use it. We set up with all our materials and supplies. We saw all of our ticketed patients and still had a little time to spare. So I asked one of the translators, because there were still some people sitting outside, I said, who of these people, of these children need to be seen? So he went and investigated and talked with them and came back and he says, there's 5 more kids that want to be seen that did not have tickets. And I said, we can see 5 more kids, that's no problem. So we started the process. Among these 5 kids, there was a small baby. Her name was Miranda. She looked to be about a few months old, But as she was being assessed by the nurse practitioners, we found out that she was actually 1 year old. She weighed all of 11 pounds. She had a very serious respiratory infection. The nurse practitioners tried to explain to the grandmother who brought her that this was a very dire situation and that this child needed to be hospitalized. The grandmother seemed indifferent and was not willing to take the baby down the mountain. As we listened to the rest of her story, we found out that her son and his wife had had 3 children, and about 6 months ago, the mother of the 3 children, had decided to leave. She didn't feel she could handle it and had left her son with the 3 children. He didn't know what to do with them, and so he brought them to his mother and left to go back down the mountain to see if he could find work. She didn't have any resources, didn't have any job, and so the best she could do was to give the baby 1 little 4-ounce can of milk each day. The child was starving. The pastor of the church at this point had no clue. We treated the baby with antibiotic injection, and the fact that she never cried when we stuck the needle, that she wasn't strong enough, was just an indication of just how sick and weak she was. The nurse practitioners didn't believe that she would live past the next few days. We put together some funds to buy milk, we sent someone on their way, and we had a conversation with the pastor who said we had no idea that her situation was so bad. He was able to rally his community around her and help them. It wasn't until later that we realized that if we had not been at this specific church, meaning we had not had road trouble and had made it to our intended site, that this grandmother never would have brought the child. As it was, she could see the building, the church that we were in, from her front porch, and she had walked up hoping for some help. If we hadn't been at that church, that pastor and congregation never would have been able to mobilize to help her. As it is, that little one has survived. She is doing well, she is walking, she has gained weight, and Dad has returned and is a part of the family. A part of the journey that only made sense in reverse. Our second area of focus is education. We believe that education is the key to a community being able to change and grow. And so offering education opportunities such as teaching seminars, discipleship programs, small business and budgeting, as well as coming alongside schools and tutoring and after-school reading programs, is very important. It's amazing to watch a kid's face when he gets to read a storybook by himself for the first time. Last year, we provided an after-school program at the Siloé Baptist Church, at their church school. We had attempted several tutor programs before that and had learned much of the difficulty was the fact of learning to read for the kids was a challenge. These kids don't have the plethora of books at home, and Mom and Dad don't have the resources to read to their kids from an early age, if Mom and Dad can read at all. Within this group, there was a young man named Stevens. He was older than all the other kids, but due to his learning disabilities, he was still in the 4th grade at the age of 15. Frustrated, he didn't really see the point. He came because we played games and did fun things and we fed them. And one of the leaders within the group, one of my translator teachers, took a special interest in him, but felt that he needed to start back at the beginning. The initial efforts were met with resistance. Stevens didn't want to have anything with going back to a primer reading book. He was too old for that. But he kept coming. He would listen to the stories that were read, and he could answer every question. He would try to learn the vocabulary, and when you'd give him a book to read in his hands, he would flip through the pages and look at the pictures. I'm done. Hand it back to you. But we kept working with him. About 6 months into the program, the day came when he was sitting there with a book in his lap. And I noticed he was slowly turning the pages. He got through the first book on his own, reading each and every word. A light came into that child's face that I will never forget. He had learned to read. It was possible. Our third area is shelter. This all started through learning about widows and young mothers that had limited ways to come up with better shelter. They didn't have the resources. It all started with a widows program that we had connected with. We started by trying to help repair roofs, add foundations, put concrete floors in houses to get people off mud floors, and has continued to grow. One such widow was a lady named Madam Patience. Her name was on a list we received after Hurricane Matthew passed through in 2016. With so many names and so little funds, we had worked with what seemed to be the biggest needs. And so it was 2 years later when a Baptist church in Missouri contacted us and said they wanted to repair a house. We looked at the list and she was the next, and so we visited with her. Her daughter had died, leaving her to raise her 3 grandchildren. As a widow, she once again had very little means of support and not many options in her elderly age. But she was doing the best she could each day. The family lived in a temporary plywood house that was put up post the earthquake. These houses were not meant to be lived in long term, and here it was 7 years later. The wood was rotten, and she had taken tree branches and put it in the ground beside the house to block the holes. It provided little protection. The team removed the old plywood, replaced parts of the rotten frame as needed. We put a concrete floor. The masons came and put a new foundation in. We put new doors and new windows on the house. And the day that we finished the house and prayed with her, with tears in her eyes, she said, "Now I have a safe place to sleep, and I will be able to sleep for the first time in a long time." She thanked God for providing for her and her grandsons. Someone said, faith to act on the strength of the absurd. We tend to look at what is in front and say, this doesn't fit me. I'm not that kind of personality. I don't have that skill. But that is when God is able to come in and do the unimaginable and the unbelievable. I am not a builder. I'm not an engineer. I am a nurse. But God has used us in building and repairing homes. And I laugh and I say, really? Me? God says, yes. Step out in faith and let me show you what I can do. To be honest, God has placed us in places and doing projects that we never expected. I never expected to build anything and only thought that I would teach medical things. I never expected to help a child read for the first time. At the time, it didn't make sense, but as I look back, I see the Master's hand through it all. But as the quote said, life must be lived forward, so we look forward to what He has planned. We have the dream of building a freestanding clinic on the mountain near Mount Sinai, so that community has continuous access to care, so that babies like Miranda can be seen before they get in such dire straits. We have dreams of continuing education programs, of helping kids and adults to read, as well as running better businesses and changing their lives and their communities. As God commanded taking care of widows who have no other means or resources. As we live forward, we trust that God will design what will only make sense in reverse. We don't have all the answers, but we do have to step forward in faith, trusting Him with our resources and all parts of our lives. Continuing the passage of Isaiah in verses 10 and 11, it says, "For as the rain and the snow come down from heavens, and do not return there, but water the earth, making it bring forth and sprout, giving seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so shall my word that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I propose, and shall succeed in the thing for which I sent it. As Job says, God's plans will not be thwarted. They will happen. The late Jim Elliot said, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." Truly allowing God to design our lives as he planned is giving into abandonment, abandoning to him, allowing him to choose what and where and how, especially when we can't see the big picture. As long as we dictate and tell what we are good at, or where we want to go, or will not go, God won't act. He waits patiently for us. And once we do abandon to him, he will take us where we never expected to go. It'll be risky, but believe me, it will be well worth letting the master designer have his own way. I'd like to leave you with this poem by Corrie ten Boom. My life is but a weaving between my Father and me. I do not choose the colors. He works steadily. Ofttimes he weaves sorrow, and I, in foolish pride, forget he sees the upper, and I the underside. Not till the loom is silent and the shuttles cease to fly will God unroll the canvas and explain the reason why. The dark threads are as needful in the skillful weaver's hand as the threads of gold and silver in the pattern he has planned. Thank you very much. At this time, as we come to the close of the service, Pastor Mark will be standing down here in front. If you have any need to come forward, any invitation, prayer, please do so at this time.